the Inti's embassy of the City of Generosity, Bayam. Helene sat in front of a dresser, looking at her beautiful yet somewhat frail reflection. She sat there in a daze for several minutes. Her escape from the Black Death had been filled with anticipation and torment. She was afraid that any tiny mishap would cause her to be discovered by pirates or adventurers, causing her to be caught by Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy once again, and making her lose all her freedom. She would then never be able to return to her hometown and return to the life she originally enjoyed. Only when she used the meager connections left by her family did she manage to hide inside her country's embassy and obtain a ticket to leave the sea, providing her a little relief. However, this still wasn't enough to make her feel at ease. She believed that everything would only be truly over when she stepped onto the northern continent. With this in mind, Helene couldn't help but raise her right hand and touch her cheeks, which weren't considered fair but was sufficiently healthy. She realized that her exquisiteness had improved significantly since her time as a sea merchant. She felt like time had reversed, making her mistake herself as returning to her days as a young lady. In fact, after entering the Inti's embassy, she had an additional choice other than escaping the sea: cooperate with the Church of Storms, Loan's military, or the embassy. By using herself as bait, they could capture Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. But after considerable thought, she finally gave up on this plan. She even begged her family elder, who was an officer in the embassy, to keep the information of her hiding in there from others. Regardless, she ultimately didn't cause me any actual harm. Many a time she indulged and satisfied me, apart from every night, but that's only on the surface. Amid her recollections, Helene quickly blushed red. Those intoxicating nights, the fiery passion from having limbs intertwined with each other, and the unimaginable pleasure flashed past her mind, leaving her unable to compose herself. Helene slowly took a deep breath before exhaling. She shook her head and made her pining for freedom, her homeland, and her family occupy her heart again. She once again looked at her reflection and coiled up her drooping red hair. Then she thickened her eyebrows with makeup and darkened the contours, making her facial features sharper and pronounced. After this round of makeup, Helene looked more androgynous, with a masculine air to her. Finally, she took off her clothes and used a cloth to flatten her chest. She then wore a white shirt, a black vest, men's trousers, and a double-breasted frock coat. Finally, she took a silk hat and wore it on her head, hiding the coiled red hair inside. At this moment, her reflection appeared more like a handsome young man than a lady. Her emerald-like eyes specifically seemed to suit her getup, giving her an alluring level of profundity. Helene patiently waited until someone knocked on her door. She picked up her luggage and walked out the door. She followed the good friend of her senior family member all the way to the side door in the embassy's garden. A carriage was there waiting for her. It was to send her to the harbor, where she would board a liner and head for the Lone Kingdom's Pritz Harbor. There, she would make a detour to return to Inti. Helene had anti-tracking bay underpowers. She carefully observed the surroundings, including the carriage driver. A thin and virile local. Doesn't like wearing hats. His looks are identical to the one I met before. He looks a little nervous, but that's normal. After Helene did her final checks, she thanked her family senior's friend, carried her luggage, and boarded the carriage. As the wheels started to roll, she pursed her lips and looked out the window, watching one Inti's parasol tree after another being quickly left behind. This gave her an inexplicable feeling, as though she was back in Trier. It was a huge city filled with sunshine, located in the region of the Rhine River and Esrenza River. It was a radiant and enchanting scene with all sorts of roses. It was a place with bustling arts and humanities, a sacred land for artists, musicians, and novelists. That was Inti's capital. After Emperor Roselle rebuilt it, it was in the true sense of the word, a world-class metropolis. It was also Helene's hometown. She grew up there and often cried when she saw it in her dream. After an unknown period of time, Helene suddenly felt something was amiss. The surrounding streets were turning more deserted and remote. As a sea merchant, although she spent most of her time in the Fog Sea and wasn't too familiar with Bayam and the Sanya Sea, being a Sequence 9 hunter made her sufficiently alert. "Is this route correct?" Helene moved from her seat and carefully asked the carriage driver. She was prepared to jump off the carriage and produce a fireball at any moment. The carriage driver didn't look back as he continued looking forward. He said with a sycophant smile, "Honorable lady, this route is closer, and it's not that easy to get into Jam. As you know, Bayam was built years ago. Back then, there weren't that many people or carriages. Many streets are narrow. Round noon and in the evening, it's very easy to encounter jams. Walking would be even faster than taking a carriage. Is that so? Helen thought about it and believed his explanation. This was because she had encountered such situations in several cities. Trier is still the best. When Emperor Roselle reformed the old city districts, he had the foresight to widen the roads. There's sufficient space even today. Helen had this thought flash through her mind when she heard the horse pulling the carriage neigh, seemingly in pain. Wait a moment. It seems to have stepped on something. The carriage driver stopped the carriage to the side and jumped off. Helen originally didn't think much of it, but sweeping the area with the corner of her eye, she realized that they were in an uninhabited, quiet alley. Her heartstrings tightened as she didn't hesitate to attempt breaking through the carriage walls and escape. Regardless of whether it was an overreaction or not, she believed that it was necessary. At that moment, an intense horror surged out from the bottom of her heart. It felt like she had been locked onto by an extremely hungry monster. The pressure she felt at a spiritual level left her hesitant. She didn't dare to rashly take action. Following that, she heard a deep voice. "T won't harm you. T have some questions for you." Helen's mind raced as she quickly considered the options placed before her. Ultimately, she didn't rashly escape. She sat back in her spot under the tremendously terrifying pressure. She planned on assessing the situation first before adjusting her plan. The door to the carriage opened, and the thin and virile local carriage driver walked in. He sat opposite Helen, and he was none other than Faceless Klein. In order to act as the carriage driver, he had specifically practiced how to drive a horse and carriage. This was a technique he had failed to properly learn while he was on the Tingen City's Nighthawk squad. Due to the little amount of time he had, he didn't master it sufficiently and could only use Creeping Hunger's aura to successfully make the horse obedient. At the same time, Danitz, who was hidden nearby, quickly ran over and took the carriage driver's seat and began driving the carriage. His round felt hat was pressed low, and he was dressed like a real carriage driver. Helen bent her back in a guarded manner, like a leopard who was ready to pounce at any time. She felt that the gaze of the man opposite her was sweeping through her forehead, her eyebrows, her eyes, nose, mouth, neck, chest, waist, and legs. It left her extremely uneasy. She had encountered such gazes and methods of sizing her up back in Tis, in Trier, and during the days when she was out at sea. It was something that disgusting perverts filled with sexual desires possessed. But this time, she strangely didn't feel insulted. She didn't have the feeling that the man would rip off her clothes or was fantasizing about something abnormal. Instead, he looks like he's studying food. He's like an icy cold snake that's slithering across my skin. Helen finally couldn't bear it as she asked, "What questions do you have?" After fully grasping her looks and features, Klein leaned forward and placed his arms on his thighs in a natural manner. He slightly clasped his palms and said, "Have you heard of a person named Jimmy Necker?" Helen took a few seconds to recall before firmly shaking her head. She slightly frowned and asked in a daze, "Have you gotten the wrong person? He's a tycoon, someone who likes to collect things." "Have you heard of such a person from Tracy?" Klein asked again. Tracy? Helen sighed secretly and replied seriously, "No." She never mentioned a tycoon who likes collecting. Klein looked at the red-haired lady's eyes and said with an unhurried tone, "Then, does her room have any ancient documents regarding the southern continent's Balam Empire?" "No. She's not someone who enjoys reading documents. She hates reading. She even gets me to read novels to her." With that said, Helen revealed a bitter smile. "What novels does she read?" Klein asked without a change in tone. "Those classics by Roselle, as well as any contemporary romance stories," Helen answered frankly. Klein nodded. "Does she have a collector's room?" "Yes, but apart from her and a few mysterious visitors, no one is allowed entry, including me," Helen said as she recalled. Klein fell silent for a few seconds as he maintained an unchanging posture. "Tell me your story." "Mind?" Helen pointed at herself in surprise. Klein nodded gently without repeating himself. Helen said after momentarily being dazed, "My story is very simple. My father is a member of the former Sauron royal family of Inti. He received quite a bit of wealth, but he lost himself to alcohol, mistresses, marijuana, and gambling, causing him to eventually go bankrupt. In order to repay the debts, I chose to accept some conditions raised by the family and became a Bayon. I then went out to sea to become a sea merchant. questioned as she spoke. Helen's eyes moved up slightly as though she was immersed in her memory. Early on, I transported iron and coal from Midseashire to Fainapotter. Then I shipped back tobacco, coffee, cocoa, and other native specialties back to Inti. This is a sea route that borders the shore, so it was rather safe. The competition was intense as well. In order to quickly get out of my predicament and save up money, I worked hard to raise my sequence, hoping that I could trade in the colony. Unfortunately, just as I familiarized myself with the sea route and made some money, I chanced upon ailment maiden Tracy, who wasn't Vice Admiral Ailment at the time, in one of her raids during my second trip to West Bala. She only had one ship back then, but she was very powerful. My partner and I resisted with our lives, but all of that was in vain. She doesn't have the habit of killing mindlessly. All she did was snatch the goods, as well as myself. As expected of an oddity among demonesses, Klein listened in silence and used his clown powers to suppress his embarrassed emotions to expressionlessly ask, "How far did the relationship between the two of you go?" "We didn't," Helen instinctively denied. "She forced me. I didn't want to die. I could only choose to accept. Besides, she's a woman. Lady, there's no need to get so worked up. If I had asked if the two of you had a relationship that went beyond friendship, would you have jumped out? It's only because I'm kind enough, and had considered your shame, which had prevented me from being so direct, sigh. Under the facade of the crazy jam and sparrow is a gentlemanly me. That's the true me." Klein switched to asking without a change in expression, "What kind of food do you like? Are there any dishes you especially like? Do you prefer sweet or salty food, or somewhere in between? What food do you dislike? What food are you allergic to? Do you have any dietary restrictions? If you do, what are they?" T4. These questions made Helen feel like she was in a dream, as though everything was surreal. She never imagined that the man would ask her such questions. It was like a pursuer was asking his crush what hobby she had. No pursuer would ask such questions. These are all indirectly obtained from numerous chats, or are obtained by other means. No woman would like to be questioned like that. This is like a survey which Emperor Roselle created. What does he want? He's asking these questions without any expression. "I'm so afraid." Helen fell silent for a few seconds before answering them one after another under Klein's cold, unmoving gaze. Klein maintained his seating posture of leaning forward and continued asking, "How do you usually sit? Do you have any habitual motions?" The more Helen answered, the more panicked she became. She had the inexplicable feeling that answering these questions would make her disappear. By the time the perplexing and terrifying survey was done, she felt heavy deep down, constantly suspecting that a terrible outcome awaited her. Why don't I risk it and jump off the carriage while he isn't paying attention? Helen seriously considered the possibility. However, the man didn't seem to have any indication of attacking her, and this made her indecisive. She felt that there was hope to resolve the matter amicably. After grasping Helen's personality, habits, and preferences, Klein turned the topic towards Vice Admiral Ailment. "What do you know of Tracy?" Helen fell silent as her mouth quivered a few times. She couldn't bring herself to speak. After the carriage continued on for quite a while, it was only then that she finally smiled ruefully. "She possesses excellent combat ability. She's good at infiltration and curses, with her being capable of turning invisible and becoming light. She grasps the means of swapping bodies with a mirror or magic staff, as well as black flames and frost. She can make enemies in a certain range suddenly fall sick, including colds, pneumonia, gastroenteritis, and other illnesses. The longer the fight lasts with her, the worse the ailments inflict. Some Bayunders might even directly die from a heart attack. She can also create invisible threads to control her enemy. She knows human anatomy very well. She can easily give people pleasure through contact, that kind of pleasure. She has an active charming ability that would make many pirates give up putting up a resistance once they're near her. She's often friendly, but she's cruel to her enemy. She enjoys destroying the perfection that others would wish to protect, making them suffer immense pain and torment. Helen didn't go into detail on how Tracy destroyed the state of perfection of others. There were many cruel stories and hilarious matters. This ailment maiden had once made her enemies, a father and son duo, kill each other, as well as instigate an enemy's wife to betray him and let him come across the scene. As expected of a demoness, She's a sequence 5 demoness who's one sequence higher than demoness of pleasure. Klein gained a basic grasp of Tracy's combat style, and he calmly asked again, does she have any mystical item? Yes, a bangle that's inlaid with diamonds. As long as she wears it, it's very difficult for Tracy to be injured. Helene hesitated before revealing Vice Admiral Ailment's secret. Klein asked a few other detailed questions as he straightened his body a little. Tracy is helping the demoness sect perform human trafficking. This was something he took great notice of when he heard Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina mention it. The demoness sect cooperated with N.C. Zangwill, and it was related to the royal family. It involved an underground ruin whose location was unknown. Tracy helped them in the human trafficking. Balin, who was pointed out by the hanged man, was someone who orchestrated numerous disappearance cases of slaves and the disappearance of primitive tribes in the southern continent. With him appearing at the underground ruins, he would be a member of the upper echelons. The biggest human trafficker, Capum, had Bayunders who were of the Arbiter pathway protecting him. And this is a pathway controlled by the Lone and Fainapotter royal families, as well as their military. All of these matters that Klein was aware of linked together to form a line, but he wasn't sure what it actually exposed. Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy was a breakthrough point. What demoness sect? Helene asked in puzzlement. You don't have to know, Klein calmly replied. If you don't know what a demoness is and end up suspecting that the extremely charming Vice Admiral Ailment who gives you pleasure is a dirty and savage man, then I'm afraid that you would have lost control on the spot. You don't have to think. I'm a good person, Klein lampooned inwardly. Helene suppressed her puzzlement and said while recalling, in recent years, she's been busy shipping slaves. The other end of the trade is crazy Captain Connors Victor. Rumor has it that he and many human traffickers and slave merchants in Lone have a deep partnership. Crazy Captain Connors Victor, Klein remembered the nickname and name. He nodded and no longer spoke in a heavy voice. Instead, he said in a relatively gentle voice, did you involve yourself in such matter? Such as being a part-time pirate. This very polite and amiable tone left Danitz trembling for some baffling reason. He felt that Jamin Sparrow being in such a state was much more terrifying than his cold and expressionless state. No. Helene shook her head. The blood of the Sauron family flows in me. I will not bring shame to my family. Besides, Tracy always said that she wouldn't let me be tainted by bloodshed and darkness. All of that would be faced by her. She must have read too many romance novels. Klein took out a gold coin and allowed it to weave between his fingers like it was dancing. He didn't keep it from Helene as he performed a divination in front of her to confirm that she wasn't lying. The result was that she was rather honest. This is also because I didn't ask in detail about her emotional entanglements with Tracy. Otherwise, she wouldn't be that honest. Klein secretly reflected and put away the gold coin. At that moment in time, the carriage had circled around the harbor, no longer heading for the ship that Helene was meant to board. Klein looked at the scenery outside the window and took out a small metal bottle. He handed it to Helene and said, use the liquid inside to wipe away your makeup. Why? Helene subconsciously asked. This isn't something you should be asking. Klein leaned forward once again and said without expression. Despite feeling aggrieved and furious, Helene didn't wish to agitate the man and get on his bad side at such a critical moment. She could only remove the bottle cap and took a sniff at it to test if it was poisonous. Can it be used directly? She asked. Klein tersely acknowledged in the affirmative. Helene took out a white handkerchief and dabbed it with the bottle's liquid. Then she began wiping her face and quickly cleaned away her prior disguise. Her aesthetically pleasing masculinity vanished, and her contours became softer as Helene's original looks were presented before Klein. After careful observation, Klein calmly said, take off your hat and let down your hair. Helene furrowed her brows and had a nagging feeling that what followed would be unacceptable instruction, such as taking off her clothes. She took a deep breath, removed her hat, and released her coiled red hair. Immediately, she appeared extremely feminine. Klein straightened his body and leaned back on the carriage wall before calmly instructing, you can put on your disguise again. Is he a madman? After all this, he wants me to revert to how I was before. Helene didn't dare to voice her displeasure, afraid that the man would raise unacceptable requests. She hurriedly opened her suitcase and took out a mirror to look at herself. The makeup has been removed so cleanly. She was stunned for a moment before she quickly put on makeup and coiled her hair. When the carriage came to stop, she was already looking like a handsome young man. Klein nodded indiscernibly and looked out the window before retracting his gaze. One last question. What? Helene asked nervously. Klein raised his line of sight a little as his facial muscles moved. How big are your breasts? Helene was first taken aback before her face flushed red. This wasn't a redness caused by embarrassment, but an anger from wanting to punch the man in the chin. Klein didn't move his gaze as he calmly added, "It's an academic question." T4, noticing no sexual intent from his eyes, Helene inhaled and closed her eyes to answer the question. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief and took out a boat ticket and a stack of paper. New identification, tickets to Tiana Port. Once you're there, buy tickets to Pritz Harbor. Helene glanced at him vigilantly before receiving the tickets and documents. She carried her suitcase and carefully alighted the carriage to see the ship she was taking. Klein followed behind her and watched her leave. From the corner of his eye, he saw Danitz trying hard to hold back his laughter. Klein slowly turned his head and shot a glance at Danitz. The pirate with a bounty of 5,500 pounds immediately shut his mouth and clamped up. It was as though nothing had happened. After confirming that Helene boarded the liner without issues, he turned around and walked to the side of the carriage. He pretended to casually ask, "Did you hear the conversation?" No. A little, just a little. Danitz shook his head as he gave a hollow chuckle. Klein nodded slightly and said, "You have to remember, otherwise it'll be easy for people to see through you." "See through me?" Danitz raised his hand and pointed at his nose and said blankly. Klein said without changing his expression, "She's from the Sauron family. She has anti-tracking Beyonder ability. Together with her tics and behavior, it can be confirmed that she's a sequence 7 from the Hunter pathway, Pyromaniac. She's very similar to you, and you'll be able to do a good job acting as her." "Me? I won't be able to disguise myself like her. I'll be identified with just a look." Danitz jumped in fright. Klein held back his laughter and said in a deep voice, "I'll lend you creeping hunger." No. I have no experience in such matter. I won't be able to fool Vice Admiral Ailment's subordinate." Abnormally nervous and horrified, Danitz declined the mission. This was an extremely embarrassing and dodged matter. Only a pervert or a madman would complete it without any qualms. Klein nodded in agreement and said without an expression, "Indeed, you are rather stupid." Danitz forced a smile. "Yes, I'm very stupid." Klein didn't say a word as he walked past Danitz and opened the door to the carriage. Danitz followed him with his eyes when he suddenly saw Jayaman Sparrow's hair turn red. He blinked his dull eyes and saw the man's facial contours turn soft and his eyes turning emerald green. His lips turned thin as they pursed, making him look frail and insecure. He had a masculine beauty and looked identical to Helene, who had just left. T4. After watching Jayaman Sparrow enter the carriage, Danitz turned his head back as the corners of his mouth twitched. He was silent for a few seconds before he muttered silently, "What a madman." He changed into a woman without any hesitation. I have to say that Helene looks pretty good when disguised as a man. This Beyonder power sure is useful. If I can receive an item like that and figure out what Captain's ideal type is, then I can make the corresponding changes and make her fall in love with me. But in that case, would the person that she falls in love with still be me? Danitz found himself pondering over philosophical questions until he heard a cough from the carriage behind him. He snapped to his senses and drove the carriage away from the harbor. He planned on making a huge detour before circling back. Inside the carriage, Klein wasn't as calm as he appeared. Although Helene was in male clothes, allowing him to temporarily not bother about the most embarrassing parts, he still felt quite embarrassed to have his face change into a woman's while squeezing out breasts. This left him feeling down and awkward. A faceless's change in appearance is very easy. The difficult part is apparently the mind. To act as a good faceless, I'll have to cross many mental blocks. If I don't, then I'll have to spend a great deal of time to act as a real person for many years. My identity has to be recognized by everyone as I fully immerse myself into that character until I almost treat it like it's real. This is more challenging on my bottom line. It's crazy and warped. To speed up my progress, I have to overcome a certain number of obstacles. Klein pulled out a suitcase from under the carriage's seat. He rummaged for some cloth and clothes before replicating Helene's disguise. He could have gotten Danitz to act as Helene and borrow the mystical item, with the faceless Beyonder characteristic from Justice, for a few days without a problem. However, that meant that there was a high chance of Danitz facing Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy directly. Without the clown's powers, it was almost impossible for him to hide it from her, putting his life in extreme danger. It was impossible for Klein to make others bear such huge risks for his own matters. Therefore, he could only challenge himself and do it himself. Soon he looked identical to Helene. Under the black top hat was a handsome androgynous face with soft and pronounced contour. His emerald green eyes looked as beautiful as gem. He adjusted his build, making himself shorter by a few centimeters and narrowing his shoulder width. His frame shrank, and he looked like he had lightened significantly. His current appearance quickly surfaced in Klein's mind with his clown power. It's still not bad. There's not much to it. Perhaps it's because I'm not in female clothes, so it doesn't feel much different from turning into J.M. and Sparrow, Danitz, or someone else. I just look prettier and have some discomfort in my chest. If I look like that on Earth, I wouldn't have needed to worry about not having a girlfriend. He mocked and consoled himself as he curled the corners of his mouth. What looked like a normal action on J.M. and Sparrow now looked pitiful and sorry. FK. Klein cursed silently as he quickly adjusted his state of mind. Bit by bit, he immersed himself into the state of true act. With the passage of time, he discovered that the resistance he had lessened significantly. Following that, he felt relaxed and calm as though the potion had harmonized itself further. And that meant that the speed of his digestion would speed up. It really is useful, Klein said silently as he got up and took 4 steps counterclockwise. He went above the gray fog and once again confirmed the danger level of his upcoming operation. After returning to the real world, he switched to using Helene's voice and deliberately suppressed it. Head to Pier 6 at the harbor. Danitz didn't find anything amiss, but he suddenly came to a realization after changing direction. He couldn't help but tremble. It's like the real person. I wouldn't be able to distinguish him if the day comes where he transforms into captain to fool me. After a while, the carriage re-entered the harbor and went to the liner which Helene was originally meant to board. But it didn't truly approach it, and had instead circled around to a nearby warehouse. Danitz jumped off the carriage and knocked on the warehouse's door, according to prior agreed pattern. Out came a group of dock workers who were clearly of native blood. Following that, they made way. After confirming that there wasn't anything amiss, the bald member of the resistance, Kallet, came out on a wheelchair. Where is she? He looked at Danitz as he asked. Through Helene's matter, Danitz had successfully established communications with the resistance. Danitz laughed mischievously. In the carriage. She's been drugged with medicine that makes her lose her strength. Its effects will last another 10 hours. Remember, I want 70% of the 1,000-pound reward. Kallet raised his right arm and waved. Immediately 2 thin members of the resistance got onto the carriage. Boss, it's that woman. They soon poked their heads out and said in the tone of a local gang. Take her down. Our mission is to protect her, Kallet emphasized again. Helene, who was disguised as a male, was helped down from the carriage with 2 soldiers supporting her on either side of her with his control as a clown. Klein pretended to be weak in the knees as he staggered. He was soon moved to a room among the Bayam populace. At the same time, Kallet instructed a local gang member, who believed in Sea God, to find strongman Ozil and tell him that they had found the target. He was to bring 1,000 pounds in exchange for the woman. As for Danitz, he had returned to the inn to await the news. At noon, Ozil replied saying that he couldn't be sure if the person was the real deal, and had planned on sending a person over to confirm things. Kallet agreed to his request. Closer to the evening, a figure appeared outside the house. He was a man wearing pantaloons and a jacket. He was low-knees and was dressed in the style of a native. He had short brows, about half of the average person's. His brown eyes were recessed, and his face looked cut. Kallet pushed himself on a wheelchair and appeared by the door. After seeing the man, he said in a heavy voice, Mither King. Should I be honored that you actually know me? The man laughed. He was originally a captain of one of the pirate ships under Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalango. After Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy took over the crew, he took on the role as third mate of her flagship, the Black Death. His nickname was Wormtongue, with a bounty of 5,400 pounds. Kallet didn't reply as he wheeled himself to make way. Mither entered a nearby room after being led by a gang member. Inside, he saw Helen sitting by the bedside in a gentleman's outfit. Her eyes were darting about and glaring at him. Her teeth bit down on her lip as she looked furious and fearful while having feelings of despair and obstinacy. TT's are all right. However, I can't be certain because she's wearing thick makeup. It's hard to tell what a woman really looks like once they don thick makeup. Wipe her face clean for me. Hey, why didn't you cuff her? Don't you know she's dangerous? Mithra surveyed the area and took 2 steps back in a guarded manner. She's been drugged. She doesn't have much strength and hasn't resisted. But since you asked, Khaled lifted his chin to a resistant soldier. The soldier found a pair of cuffs and walked over. After pulling Klein's hands back, he cuffed him. Klein continued wearing mixed emotions like before, trying hard to act like he was struggling despite having a lack of strength. Then another gang member got some water and wiped his face with a rough towel. Thankfully, most of the makeup in this era isn't waterproof. Klein began changing his face's contours as the towel covered his face. Before long, Mithra saw Helen's moist face. She looked extraordinarily frail and beautiful in this state. Her emerald green eyes shot out with intense hatred and a look of perplexity. Unfortunately, she's Captain Mithra's throat moved. As a man and a pirate, he often fantasized about Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy and red-haired Helen falling into his embrace at the same time. But of course, it was only his imagination. The way he looks at me is disgusting, Klein nearly puked. Although he knew that it was targeted at red-haired Helen and had nothing to do with him, he couldn't help but feel goosebumps. In that instant, he got to know the real him a little deeper. He knew what things he couldn't accept at all. TT really is her. Mithra turned his head and said to Khaled, "This is your reward." He threw the tiny leather bag in his hand over to him. Khaled did a brief inspection and threw it to his subordinate. He pondered for a second and said, "We still need your help." "No problem. Seek out Ozza when needed." Mithra pointed to red-haired Helen in the room and asked, "I'll take her away, right?" "Yes." Khaled made way once again. Klein didn't wish to be helped by Mithra, as he pretended to have regained some of his mobility while stumbling out. Mithra was afraid of Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, so he could only hold her by her shoulder and lead her to the carriage parked outside. The carriage left the city and came to a private harbor. Mithra led Klein, who was disguised as red-haired Helen, onto a fishing boat which had been long prepared. Under the cover of the night, they left Bayam. After about an hour, they saw a ship docked under the shadow of an island's cliff. Fluttering in the wind was a huge flag with white bones drawn on it. Black Death. Only a single Black Death. The other ships are anchored beyond the Rorsted Archipelago's confines because they're afraid of being discovered. This is good news. Klein retracted his gaze and deliberately bit his lip to express his agitation. After taking a glance at Helen's side profile, Mithra lit a torch and began swinging it to signal to the flagship. Before long, a dinghy came and took him and the disguised Klein back to the Black Death. As the dinghy was being hoisted up, Klein boarded another pirate admiral's flagship. Under Mithra's lead, he entered the cabin. Waiting for them up ahead was a blonde female attendant. She glanced at Helen with a cold stare before pointing sideways to the room. "Go in." This attitude, it's like meeting a love rival in the flesh. Both men and women fall to this Vice Admiral Ailment's charm. The cuffed Klein instantly increased his vigilance as he wore a heavy expression and followed the blonde female attendant into the room. He originally believed that he would immediately meet Tracy and obtain a chance to meet her in private. He was already ready to strike, but apart from a wardrobe, sofa, and full-body mirror in a cramped carpeted room, there was nothing. Could it be that Tracy has deliberately given Helen the cold shoulder to express her anger? Klein recalled the romance novels and contrived television serials he had previously watched while contemplating the reason for the ailment maiden's action. The blonde female attendant shot a glance at Helen's male attire that lacked the androgynous beauty to it due to the lack of makeup, took 2 quick steps, opened the wardrobe, and pointed to the dresses inside. "Captain doesn't like your present attire." "Chain." F.K. Klein cursed inwardly. He originally imagined that he could be granted a meeting with Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy while looking like Helen and dressed as a male. He was thankful that he didn't need to overly humiliate himself to achieve his goal, but in the end, he didn't manage to escape this outcome that he wanted to avoid. Seeing Helen standing there in a daze, the blonde female attendant glared at her. "You have 2 choices. Either you change yourself or I'll help you." Klein did one of red-haired Helen's habitual motions and inhaled slightly. "Remove my cuffs." He turned his body sideways and gestured with his chin towards the door. "And go outside." "Conniving whore." The blonde female attendant cursed under her breath and used the key given to her by Mither to release Helen from her cuffs. After she left the room and closed the door, Klein walked to the wardrobe and stood there in a daze for 20 seconds. Suddenly, he closed his eyes and extended his right hand. After an unknown period of time, he came in front of the full-body mirror and saw Helen's red hair cascading down in the reflection. Her green eyes shimmered while she wore a golden-red dress. By her waist was a ribbon tied into a flower. It was pulled tight, accentuating her slender waist. Helen's beautiful face was flushed red as her lips were tightly pursed. Her expression was heavy, looking very identical to the picture from before. Klein looked at his present image and first felt somewhat embarrassed. However, he had gotten over it to a certain extent while changing. Besides, there wasn't anyone inside. Second, he gradually found a different feeling. This wasn't to say that he was gradually liking such acts. Instead, while overcoming his mental aversion, he gained some form of detachment from his self-awareness. It felt like his soul had flown out of his body, allowing him to calmly observe Helen dressing up in female attire and adjusting her clothes through the mirror with a calm attitude. He believed this was a necessary step in his mission, and that there was nothing embarrassing or odd about this. Klein felt a baffling sense of familiarity as he tried hard to recall and compare this feeling, in a bid to fix it in place and gain an understanding of it. Soon he found the source. This was similar to him playing role-playing game. In it, he could choose a female character, carefully choosing the facial features and attire of the character, allowing the beauty to please his eye. There was nothing kinky or embarrassing while doing this. On the one hand, he was viewing it from an angle of a god through the screen, making his attitude detached, and on the other hand, he was seriously acting and going through the plot. By combining the two perfectly and not distinguishing between them, he didn't have any aversion to it because he was playing a game. This, Klein suddenly opened his half-closed eyes, feeling like this was the faceless state he had been searching for. He could act as anyone, but he was still only himself. As he got into character and worked hard to act, he could detach his feelings and observe things calmly. By making comparisons, he could figure himself out and find his true self. It's both getting into character and detachment. This is the actual application of the faceless's main principle. Klein suddenly felt at peace, as the remnant embarrassment coexisted with his changed attitude. With a detached attitude, as though he was playing a role-playing game, he observed himself in the full-body mirror and tried hard to find any flaws. Thankfully, I got Danitz to get 2 sets of female clothing to study the way it's all put together. Otherwise, there's no way I could wear them so quickly and normally as a first-timer. It will be easy to expose any flaw. Hey, this is called professionalism. Women's clothing sure is complicated. From the perspective of a faceless, there are many flaws in Helen's facial features and contour. She might be beautiful, but it's definitely nothing I call stunning. Yes, with this state of mind, I can clearly feel the potion digesting. Klein looked at himself in the mirror as though he was looking at a character named Helen. Thump, thump, thump. The blonde female attendant banged on the door and asked impatiently, "Are you not done?" Klein's face instantly sank, as though she hadn't returned him the 10,000 pounds she owed him. He maintained this state as he walked to the door and pulled it open. The blonde female attendant shot him a glance and raised the handcuffs. "Put your hands to your back. You're now a prisoner." As red-haired Helen was on the Black Death, she wasn't afraid that she would bring her any harm. All she wanted was to humiliate her as much as she could. Klein grunted and half-turned his body, putting his hands to his back. He felt relaxed because the woman wasn't paying too much attention to his attire. After putting on the cuffs, he was led by the blonde female attendant to the entrance of the captain's cabin. The door was half open, allowing a fragrance of warmth emanate outside. It wasn't too strong, but it was sufficiently long-lasting. It was a scent that kept pulling one back, as they would involuntarily wish to head to bed for pleasure. The blonde female attendant knocked on the door and was just about to say a word when a gloomy but sufficiently beautiful female voice sounded from the inside. "Let her come in alone." The blonde attendant's face instantly sank as she pushed open the door, signaling with her eyes for Klein to enter. The moment of truth is here. Klein took a deep breath and stepped into the room. The door behind him closed with a thud, isolating the inside from the outside. Klein walked across the thick carpet and, using the candlelight from the golden candle racks, saw a rather beautiful lady sitting behind a desk while leaning back. She was wearing beige trousers with her feet extended diagonally while crossed. Her brows were long and straight, and her azure blue eyes were sharp and bright. She wore a white linen shirt, allowing her intimate body to faintly peek through. Raven black curled hair cascaded down to hide the critical bits, making Klein instantly feel uncomfortable. Upon seeing red-haired Helene enter, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy raised her left hand and asked with an ambiguous smile, "Tell me, how should I punish you?" She held a black leather whip in her hand. "Ma'am, there's always room for discussion," Klein lampooned to resist his discomfort. His eyes first moved upwards before leveling towards her. He said without a hint of emotion, "Returning to this place is already the greatest punishment. Anything else is just a bonus." "You're as stubborn as usual, yet always so indecisive." Tracy stood up. She was tall and slender, and under the illumination of the candlelight, her figure's shadows danced with extreme charm. She held back her smile and walked towards red-haired Helene, with the leather whip in her left hand. She didn't have an ounce of doubt. During this process, Klein noticed that she wore a bangle with inlaid diamonds on her right wrist. The mystical item described by Helene. It can reduce most forms of damage. Klein, who had originally planned to take action the moment the gap between them narrowed, held back his urge. "Oh, they cuffed you. That's nice. We haven't played such a game before," Tracy said with a smile, but her azure blue eyes seemed to be a stormy ocean that was gathering strength. "Ma'am, your lines are quite terrible." Klein pursed his lips tightly and didn't say a word. Tracy came in front of him and raised her right hand to slide down his cheek. "Returning is the greatest punishment." As she spoke, her eyes turned misty, looking extremely alluring. "You usually don't seem to think so. Although you always resist in the beginning, you're often more passionate than me towards the end." Before she finished her sentence, Klein pulled out his left hand from the handcuff, and he grabbed the bangle on her wrist in a manner that was as fast as lightning. He then violently swiped it down. At the same time, that hand turned a shade of gold. Klein's green and deep eyes suddenly lit up with two bolts of lightning. This was creeping hunger. This was psychic piercing. And the ability to pull his hand out of the cuffs was a magician power. It was the bone-softening power which Klein very seldom used. He had long made plans in preparation for what he would do after infiltrating. It was to find a chance to be alone with Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy and assassinate her without holding back. Only by doing so did he have a chance of defeating a pirate admiral. Only by doing so could he severely injure and capture her. And even if it couldn't be done, he didn't mind killing her. He was already very accustomed to channeling spirits above the gray fog. He wasn't afraid of not being able to obtain the intelligence he needed. The human trafficker didn't deserve any pity. In addition, in order to prevent himself from tripping himself up, he only brought the most difficult-to-detect creeping hunger, which was good at disguising itself. The other mystical items were placed in the mysterious space above the gray fog. Furthermore, he was on the Black Death with several opposing Bayonders on board. He had to finish the battle as quickly as possible. This was also to avoid being taken down by Tracy's ailment power. The longer he fought her, the worse the ailments inflicted on him would be. In that instant, the bangle with inlaid diamonds was removed from Tracy's wrist. Klein's green eyes flashed with lightning, while the beautiful and charming Vice Admiral Ailment remained in a daze. All she did was instinctively dodge. She couldn't believe that Helene would attack her, or dare believe that she possessed such reactions and abilities. Tracy saw two bolts of lightning light up in Helene's beautiful emerald-like eyes as the blinding silver occupied her entire vision. Her beautifully contoured chin was suddenly lifted, as though she was about to let out a tragic scream. However, she stiffened on the spot, shattering like a mirage. The full body mirror placed in the room cracked and quickly crumbled, scattering to the floor. Mirror substitution spell. Tracy's figure, in her pure white shirt, beige trousers, and black leather boots, appeared in the corner where the full-body mirror was located. Before she could catch her breath, she heard heavy footsteps and saw red-haired Helene's dress fluttering to the back as she charged forward like a chariot. The glove she wore on her left hand was pale and gloomy green. Klein had already switched to a zombie state. His muscles were taut, and his strength had increased substantially. His sleeves fluttered as he clenched his fist tightly, before throwing it at Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy like an iron hammer. Bang, bang, bang. Although he continued maintaining Helen's appearance, his actions were like a ferocious beast. He was fierce and formidable. As he bombarded Tracy with his punches and kicks, all she could do was desperately parry his attacks without having the time to use other beyond her power. If a demoness of affliction's corresponding sequence 9 was an assassin, allowing her to have extraordinary combat skills and dodging capabilities, this barrage of attacks would have left her heavily injured. Bang, bang, bang. Klein's fist emanated a white, frosty air, causing Tracy to tremble with every time she made contact. Gradually, ice began to form on the surface of her body. This was a zombie's mastery of frost power. Seeing her blood gradually stiffen, Tracy didn't hesitate and took the blow. Her lips turned pale as her mouth opened slightly as she let out a formless scream. Accompanied by this scream, a blue illusory halo surged out from her body. It left stacked layers of frost in its wake. In just 1 or 2 seconds, both of them found themselves in a frozen world. They were surrounded by thick and transparent ice, and there was loose frost blanketing the exterior. The two looked very close to one another, but they needed to break through the various obstructions to fight each other. A smile appeared on Tracy's gallant and brilliant face as a silent black flame ignited within her body. It quickly melted the surrounding ice as it began to launch a counterattack, allowing Ailment Maiden to grasp the advantage. At this moment in time, she saw Helen, who was often frail and indecisive, snap her fingers without an expression. A matchstick she hadn't noticed lit up as scarlet flames leaped. Instantly, it enveloped the red-haired figure's dress. Tracy's pupils constricted as her spiritual intuition gave her an extreme sense of foreboding. In the silent black flames behind her, Klein leaped out in the form of Helen. He extended both his arms and hugged Tracy, locking her arms in the process. At the same time, he opened his mouth and shouted bang. A formless air bullet shot out with might that exceeded that of a revolver. It was comparable to the latest rifle model. It passed through the void and accurately hit the back of Tracy's head. Oof! The bullet drilled through her skull, but Vice Admiral Ailment's figure suddenly contracted, turning into a broken black staff. Magic staff substitution spell. Tracy rapidly appeared diagonally across him. The buttons on her shirt dropped as she revealed a mesmerizing view of fair skin. However, what caught Klein's attention wasn't that but the blood on her palm. While Klein restrained Tracy, she had clawed behind her, ripping off a piece of fabric and injuring his thigh. At this moment, Tracy quickly opened and closed her mouth twice as illusory black flames appeared from her palms to burn the blood. This was black magic, a witch's curse. Klein couldn't help but tremble. A black flame ignited from within, from his soles to the top of his head. He was rapidly reduced to paper shreds. Just as he appeared in another corner, he felt countless invisible spider webs swirl towards him. Some were hard and attempted to bind him, while others were soft, in a bid to stimulate different parts of his body. Klein, who was a Beyonder who acted extremely calm during combat, felt his heart race as his ears heated up. His body turned numb and sore, having the discomfort of a cold, while having the urge to have his blood surge downwards. Compared to Madame Sharon from Tingen City, Tracy's spiderweb was far more terrifying. Klein didn't dare to underestimate it, as he immediately snapped his finger. The snap ignited all the surrounding spiderwebs as scarlet flames extended from where they came from and surged towards Tracy like a tidal wave. Back in Tingen, Klein already knew that the spiderwebs from a demoness of pleasure were weak against fire. Instantly, the middle of the room became a huge, ignited web. Tracy was caught by surprise as the flames swept towards her. Humph! She exhaled as an eerie blue illusory light surged outwards and froze her within a transparent but gigantic crystal. The scarlet flames surged over and kept melting the ice, but it gradually weakened. Klein didn't pick up the diamond-inlaid bangle because he wasn't sure what negative side effects it might have. Rashly use a mystical item without sufficient comprehension of it was highly likely to be harmful rather than beneficial. He straightened his body and opened his arms, letting his left glove be dyed in the lustrous glow of the sun. Priest of Light. At that instant, Tracy, who was hiding inside the ice, felt that extremely familiar Helen wore a holy luster. In between her brows, an unprecedented tenacity surged out. She was pretty and no longer frail. Like a blooming sunflower, she was like a flower of war stained with blood. Tracy shouted with a clearly hoarse voice, "Who are you? Why don't you dare to show yourself?" While wearing a dress, using my own looks would look so odd. It's more suitable to use Helene's appearance. Klein detached himself as this thought flashed through his mind. Following that, he praised the sun. Magnificent pure beam of light descended with golden flames swirling around. It completely blanketed the ice and Tracy. As the ice rapidly melted and vanished at a discernible pace, the bright and holy light dimmed before disintegrating. The color in Tracy's face drained as she did a somersault and agilely dodged Klein's psychic piercing from his switch to the interrogator's soul, letting whatever damage she received happen inside the beam of light. The light of holiness was strong against the undead and corrupt, so it was only considered an ordinary sequence 5 strike on a demon. Bang! 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 Tracy did multiple somersaults and dodged Klein's air bullets, leaving holes in the carpet. As she rolled, her figure vanished from her enemy's sight. The demoness's invisibility, Klein bent his back slightly as he was on high guard. He then used his spiritual perception and his sense of danger as a clown to seek out Tracy's location. However, he was unable to find her in that short amount of time. Furthermore, his forehead was heating up and his lungs were burning. His throat hurt and itched. He nearly couldn't keep himself from coughing any longer. No, I can't let this drag out any longer. Klein's thoughts raced as he suddenly laughed deeply. He then used a stiff male's voice and said, "Helene told me your secret. She also told me all of her secrets." Before he finished his sentence, his spiritual perception was triggered. This was because he discovered an intense emotional fluctuation in a particular corner. The emotions of rage and hatred were impossible to hide from him. Klein immediately turned around and looked over. Instantly, layers of golden scales appeared on his left glove. His eyes were tainted with a pale gold color as his pupils turned vertical. Silently, Tracy's figure was outlined as she wore a painful and twisted expression. Her extremely feminine raven-black curly hair grew uncontrollably as they spread in every direction. Psychiatrist's frenzy. Tracy, whose emotions had been stirred, nearly broke down when faced with such an attack. She temporarily lost her reasoning. Klein took the opportunity and snapped his fingers. An air bullet crossed the distance between them, heading straight for Tracy's face that remained beautiful despite the twisted expression. Suddenly, a wisp of thick, raven-black hair swept over, changing the trajectory of the air bullet. It struck Tracy in the left shoulder, causing her clothes to tear and blood to spurt. Even her bones were exposed. "Ugh!" Tracy let out a shrill cry as immense amounts of black flames spewed out of her body and enveloped her. Following that, thick ice crystals formed outside the black flame. Beyond it, raven-black curly hair that frantically grew wrapped Tracy, the black flames, and the ice in thick layers. It seemed to form a gigantic cocoon made of human hair. Bang! 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 Klein's air bullets shot out one after another, but they only penetrated the black hair and got stuck in the ice. He paused and made his left glove emit the brilliance of the sun. At that moment his throat itched. Unable to control himself any further, he began coughing violently. He failed to produce the attacks he was preparing to deliver. Inside the black-haired cocoon, Tracy had recovered her senses. She raised her voice and shouted sharply, "Enemy assault! Enemy assault!" At that instant, Klein paused for a second. In his moment of adrift thoughts, he felt as though he had returned to Backland, returning to the first time he encountered the devil dog. He knew he wasn't its match and could only shout "murder" and "save me" before successfully escaping from the danger. At that moment in time, Tracy's cries had the same effect. Even if there weren't a dozen Beyonders on the Black Death, the number was close to that. Furthermore, there were relatively many Beyonders of relatively high sequences. Indeed, killing a pirate admiral in a short period of time is too difficult, even if it's an assassination. Klein coughed twice and snapped his finger. He stopped attacking and hesitating. He turned and ran for the window in the captain's cabin. The last thing he noticed was the diamond-inlaid bangle, but he didn't dare to retrieve it. Firstly, he was afraid that the severe negative effects would affect his escape. And secondly, he was afraid that Tracy would be able to lead a bunch of Beyonders to pursue him with the help of the item's location after she recovered. A pursuit at sea would then unfold. "I can't be greedy." Klein turned his head and smashed through the window and fell onto the deck. Two pirates happened to come over as they thrust their cutlasses forward. Oof! Oof! Their cutlasses pierced through a paper figurine. Klein's figure instantly appeared behind one of the pirates as he extended his left hand, opening up a ferocious and creepy mouth on his palm. Creeping hunger bit down on its food, while Klein lifted the pirate up before other Bayonders rushed over. He took wide steps and ran to the shipboard. Under gunfire, he plunged into the dark sea under the night sky. The ice-cold water instantly inundated Klein, drenching his golden-red dress and making him sink like a rock. At the same time, creeping hunger had already finished eating the pirate, lightening his load. Klein didn't attempt to float up, and had instead continued sinking downwards. He could faintly hear splashing sounds across the distant wave. Apparently, pirates from the sailor pathway had engaged in pursuit. This was their home ground. They could act like fish in such environments for a very long period of time. Klein wasn't alarmed. As a magician who never performed unprepared, he had obviously thought of his escape plans if he met with failure. After all, there was nothing guaranteed about such matters. To do his best acting as Helene and not be discovered by Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, he had not only left the other mystical items and cache above the gray fog, but he had even done so for the charms that came under the water and wind domain that he recently made. However, this didn't affect him. As a god, a blessed, and a believer trinity, he had many miraculous methods to deal with the corresponding situation. He quickly made creeping hunger turn pale and be dyed in a gloomy green. The surrounding seawater froze, forming layers of frost. Before the frost completely turned into ice, Klein spread his wing muscles and spread out his arm. With the strength of a zombie, he shattered the frost, sending them slightly further away. This way, he temporarily produced a narrow space that didn't have any seawater around it. The water instantly surged backwards to fill the space. Klein extended his left palm and released the terrifying cold and spread it out, creating layers of ice wall. For a brief moment, he seemed to be encased in an ice prison. He could stand in it and produce sound, but he was only limited to that tiny space. Klein immediately took tiny steps in a counterclockwise fashion, while murmuring blessings stem from the celestial worthy of heaven and earth, before rapidly letting his spirit body go above the gray fog. Just as his body appeared at the fool's high-backed chair, he immediately picked up the sea god's scepter which he had placed on the table. Without needing to identify anything, he selected the point of light representing Jam and Sparrow, who had recently been promoted to a believer of sea god. Through a previously established connection, he raised the short milky white scepter and made the blue gems on it emit a blurry luster. He replied to his believer and augmented himself with all sorts of spells, including but not limited to underwater breathing, freedom of movement, and pressure resistance. Finally, he used a paper angel to interfere with any divination. He then ordered the nearby undersea creatures to help protect Jam and Sparrow's escape. After doing all of this, Klein didn't delay and had immediately returned to the real world and gained control of his body. At that moment, the seawater's pressure had crushed the constantly melting ice wall and had retaken that independent space. However, Klein could already breathe easily and swim rapidly. Through the rippling but crystalline water, he saw fishes swimming towards him. A dark shadow rose up from beneath his feet as an unknown behemoth rapidly rose. It was a strange brownish-red creature that looked like a squid. It was so massive that its tentacles were enough to bind an entire ship. It spewed black ink and instantly dyed the surrounding sea black. The few sailor pathway Bayonders who were pursuing Klein instantly saw black as their bodies turned numb. Unclear of what was happening, they immediately floated to the surface and dealt with the abnormalities in their body. By the time they dived down again to find the enemy, they had already lost track of Klein. At this moment, Klein was swimming at the bottom of the sea with great satisfaction. He even had the time to divert his attention to recall his failed operation and reflect on what he had done. I had sufficient preparations to act as Helene. Even Tracy, who had shared numerous nights with her on the same bed, couldn't instantly see through me. It accelerated the digestion of the potion. During this process, I still had to overcome my aversion and find a way to both get into character and be detached. This was extremely helpful to the digestion of the potion. I basically did the best I could for the battle. It can be considered a prepared performance, but I underestimated the strength of a Sequence 5 Demoness of Affliction and the experience of someone who inched her way to becoming Vice Admiral Ailment. Even though she lost her mystical item in the beginning, just my present strength and my mystical item weren't enough to kill her quickly, unless I had used the Sea God Scepter, but this is around the Rorsted Archipelago. Through today's battle, I can clearly tell that I lack a mystical item with powerful offensive abilities. Facing the reality of a failed mission, Klein was no doubt somewhat disappointed. However, he wasn't depressed, because this wasn't the end of this matter. He planned on writing to Mr. Azek to see if he was interested in the ancient chronicles related to death, and if he had the time to pay a visit. Before Klein left the captain's cabin, he had snapped his fingers to ignite the male clothing he had left in the changing room, as well as any hair or skin he had left behind. This was to make it seem like he didn't wish to leave any traces, but it was in fact a form of concealment and deceit. What he was concealing was the hair and butt he had secretly thrown into a particular room without anyone noticing after he entered the cabin. Having wiped away any traces of himself, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy would mistakenly believe that the assassin was afraid of exposing himself because of the fear of suffering a remote curse. Then it would be difficult for her to seriously get the pirates to check for any remnant item. With the hair and button, Klein could use divination to lock onto the location of the Black Death up to a certain amount of time. This way, as long as Mr. Azek was willing, he could bring him to Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. So I originally thought I wouldn't need Mr. Azek's help. I thought I could succeed just by myself, alone. Ultimately, I fell just short. Klein sighed and felt a blow to his self-esteem. This was one of the reasons why he didn't seek Mr. Azek's help in the beginning. The other reason was that he wasn't certain that Tracy was in possession of the ancient chronicles related to death. If she really didn't have it, it would be rather awkward to have Mr. Azek make a trip for nothing. Furthermore, he was worried that even with Mr. Azek's help, that he would still need to act as Helene to find the Black Death and Tracy. He still needed to wear her clothes and use himself as bait. That would be too embarrassing to do it in front of someone he knew. In fact, if it wasn't to obtain intelligence and solely to eliminate Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, it would have been a lot simpler. Once I swim back to Bayham and go above the gray fog, I simply need to lock onto their location and use the Sea God Scepter to create a storm. This isn't to say that a huge area of attack blast will definitely kill Tracy on the spot, but it will attract Sea King John Cotman's attention. When the time comes, the Black Death's location would be exposed to the Church of Storms. Sea King will happily take down Ailment Maiden. Klein shook his head with self-deprecating mockery. With his seer spiritual intuition guiding him, he rapidly swam towards the shore. On the Black Death, Tracy removed her layers of defense and walked to the diamond-inlaid bangle in her damaged, blood-stained clothes. She bent down to pick it up. What a cautious attacker. I might not even be comparable to her back when I was an assassin, know him. Tracy suddenly clenched her teeth. This wasn't because she nearly died at his hands, but because he had sensed that the man had done something to Helene. According to the way Emperor Roselle put it, she suspected that there was something green sup growing on her head. Helene, are you really that cold and heartless? No, perhaps she was forced. Tracy turned her head to look at the nasty wound on her left shoulder as she felt the heart-wrenching pain. If not for the strengthening of her physique brought about by the assassin and instigator sequence, with a significant enhancement in subsequent sequences, just that one blow alone could have made her lose her entire arm. She would be like those pirates who had their arms blown off by rifle. As the blood flowed and stained her vision red, Tracy got the blonde female attendant to enter and use her abilities to help her deal with her injuries, while instructing the surrounding pirates who had their eyes fixated on her to search for any items the attacker had left behind. Unfortunately, the pirates informed her that all of his clothes had been automatically destroyed. This made Tracy recall the snap the enemy had made before he left. She sighed once again. How careful. Furthermore, he's not one bit greedy. If he had taken the bangle, then I wouldn't need to worry about not catching up to him. Tracy waved her hand, motioning for most of the pirates to leave, leaving behind Wormtongue Mither King and a few high-ranking members of the crew. Third mate, go to Bayham again. Perform a thorough investigation to figure out where the resistance found that Helene, Tracy ordered in a solemn voice. With great difficulty, Mither retracted his gaze from his captain's chest. All right. Tracy thought for a moment and added, spread this matter. Say that I'm seriously injured and will not be able to recover anytime soon. Also, first mate, immediately set sail. Don't stay here any longer. As she issued orders, silence was quickly restored around Tracy. Only at this point did she have the time to figure out which faction the attacker came from, why he would attack her, and what motives he had. Unfortunately, the more Tracy thought, the more puzzled she became. She had no idea what the truth was. Although she had many enemies, none of them possessed similar power. Finally, she found a clue as she muttered to herself, creeping hunger. In the middle of the night, in a private harbor on Blue Mountain Island, standing by the receding and advancing waves, was a female figure. She was none other than Klein, who was still disguised as Helene. He circled under the water and quickly came onto shore. He infiltrated the house of a nearby fisherman and got some tattered clothes to change into before changing back into Jam and Sparrow. Leaving behind the rather expensive dress as compensation, Klein rapidly left the private harbor and returned to the city of Generosity, Bayam, before daybreak. He wasn't in a rush to meet up with Danitz. Instead, he found a random motel to stay in. He used a ritual and brought back Azek's copper whistle, other mystical items, and cash back to the real world. After confirming that he could divine the location of the Black Death, he blew the copper whistle. After lowering the copper whistle, Klein had already activated his spirit vision. He saw illusory white bones being weakly thrown up from the ground, as they slowly formed a gigantic figure. If the past scenes were like a fountain in a fantasy setting, then this was more like the flow from an ordinary reverse tap. The corners of Klein's mouth moved indiscernibly as he pretended, as though he hadn't noticed anything amiss. After a few seconds, the skeleton messenger finally took form. Its nearly 4 meters body tore through the ceiling once again, as the pitch-black flames in its eye sockets burned silently. Klein folded the letter he had finished writing and threw it up. He described in detail the tycoon, Jimmy Necker, in the letter. He mentioned the connections between the death chronicles found in the southern continent's Balam Empire's mausoleum, as well as the connection the item had with Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos and Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. He also mentioned how he had successfully sneaked in, and although his assassination had failed, he had left behind something that could be used to determine the location of the Black Death. Of course, he didn't go into detail how he sneaked in. He had only roughly recounted Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's combat techniques and style. After the messenger caught the letter with a swipe that could send an adult human flying, Klein coughed and cleared his throat. T already have a messenger. The pitch-black flames in the skeleton messenger's sockets clearly flickered before its body collapsed like a waterfall before drilling into the parquet. You don't have to be afraid of becoming my messenger anymore, right? Am I that detestable to your kind? Yes, these messengers from the underworld probably can't bear to leave Mr. Azek. After all, that's a direct descendant of death. There might not even be any skip in the generational line. You want to cozy up with someone powerful. I get it. Klein was just about to pack up and check out when his nose itched suddenly and sneezed. Achoo! Achoo! Cough! 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 Mucus flowed out as he coughed. His forehead slowly, but decisively began burning with heat. Oh no! Vice Admiral Ailment's ailment is still lingering in my body. And I confronted a 10°C cold wind in order to return to Bayam. I really fell ill as a result. Klein used inferior tissue paper to wipe his mucus, contemplating whether to summon himself and act using a spirit body state, so that his physical body could heal by itself. After serious consideration, he believed that it was impossible. Firstly, his physical condition would clearly affect his spirit body's condition. The two were closely related in some magical manner. Secondly, if he ignored it, his physical condition would definitely worsen. I'm becoming a little dazed from the fever. Klein touched his forehead and prepared to return to the Wind of Azure Inn to meet up with Danitz. Then he had to consider if he should head to a hospital or clinic to buy some medicine. In the Berg household in the City of Silver, Derek finally obtained the Radiant Spirit Packed Tree Fruit from Ma'am Hermit, and he successfully concocted the Solar High Priest Potion. It was golden in color and had a scorching hot temperature. When Derek drank it, he felt the burning sensation in his throat. His eyes lit up suddenly as they grew brighter like there were 2 miniature suns hidden in them. His body radiated concentric ripples of pure light, as his exposed skin protruded to form black patterns that were visible to the naked eye. At the same time, his body hair grew longer, as though they were changing into feathers that were swirling with golden flame. Derek knew that there would be similar changes when consuming a potion at sequence 7. He didn't panic or become flustered. He clenched his teeth and repeatedly recalled that pain of him personally killing his parents and the hope that arose from the depths of his heart after meeting Mr. Fool. Despite being on the brink of losing control, he managed to persevere through it. After a while, everything abnormal about him was restored back to normal. However, the air he exhaled was mixed with the warmth of the sun. He felt that his body had become stronger again, and he had some considerable resistance against ailments and treacherous environment. However, that wasn't the main point. Derek liked the various theurgical knowledge that appeared in his mind. They included Fire of Light, Horror Immunity, Holy Oath, Cleave of Purification, Sun Halo, Holy Light Summoning, Holy Water Creation, etc. Derek paced around in delight as he felt that the related theurgical spells he had were very suitable for him in dealing with the evil monsters that hid in the dark. He didn't hide the news and immediately ran to the Twin Towers and recorded the information of his advancement. This way, after a preliminary inspection, he would have the qualifications to helm a small patrolling team as its captain. He could come into contact with more of the City of Silver's information. This includes the method to removing the mental corruption of a Beyonder characteristic, which Mr. World wants. While Derek was answering the registration clerk's various questions, he couldn't help but recall the promise that he hadn't been able to fulfill all this time. Owing something to others often left him uneasy and uncomfortable. And now he could finally see the light that could restore his calm. In the amorous leaf bar, Wormtongue Mither King was holding a cup of red wine. He sat across from the elderly strongman Ozzel, crossed his right leg, and leisurely asked, "Did you figure out anything specific?" He had been instructed by his captain, Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy, to return to Bayham and investigate the fake Helling. For this, he found Ozzel, who had originally issued the mission. He couldn't directly seek out the resistance, because there was a small chance that they were cooperating with the fake Helling. To question them in person was no different from directly bringing his head to the Governor General's office in exchange for the bounty reward. Ozzel pulled a chair and sat down. "They didn't hide anything, but I can't be sure if they're speaking the truth or not. As you know, I prefer using fists rather than brain. They said that Helling was brought over by Blazing Danitz. He represented Vice Admiral Iceberg and hoped to establish a cooperative relationship with the Resistance. They wanted to provide a certain amount of help, and Helling was a way to express their goodwill." Blazing Danitz, Vice Admiral Iceberg. Mither ruminated over the two names as his expression slowly turned solemn. He leaned back into his chair as he knitted his brows bit by bit. As one of Vice Admiral Hurricane's former captains, he was now the third mate of Vice Admiral Ailment's flagship. He was no stranger to the other pirate admirals, and he knew that Vice Admiral Iceberg was powerful and had a rich collection. With just one ship and a few subordinates, she was able to resist the other pirate admiral. In terms of strength, she was a little stronger than two of his bosses. More pertinently, Vice Admiral Iceberg seldom involved herself in the conflict between pirates. She sought information and explored the unknown to seek out treasure. She was more like an adventurer than a pirate. Why would she suddenly want to assassinate Captain? This doesn't suit her character. She previously suffered a setback because of Admiral of Blood's rumor. She should be focusing on seeking revenge on him. Mither took a sip of red wine as he rubbed his forehead with his other hand. He temporarily stopped thinking about Vice Admiral Iceberg, and he placed his attention on Blazing Danitz. As he carefully recalled, his pupils suddenly shrank. He discovered that there were some recent problems regarding this fourth boatswain of the Golden Dream he was familiar with. He laid a trap and killed Steel Mavetti, Blood Brambles Hendry, and Calm Squall. His bounty was raised to 4,200 pounds, and in a short period of time, he got embroiled in some matter, causing his bounty to rise again, reaching 5,500 pounds. "This has already exceeded my bounty," Mither thought to himself silently as Blazing Danitz's figure surfaced before him. He found him mysterious and terrifying. He advanced, or did he receive some great benefits because of something? Mither leaned forward and put down the cup. He whispered seriously, "I originally treated his bounty increase as a joke. But reality has informed me that Blazing Danitz is a great pirate worthy of a 5,500-pound bounty." Mither looked up and said to Strongman Ozzel, "Help me seek out intel on Blazing. The recent ones." The luxurious suite in the Wind of Azure Inn. When Danitz opened the door and saw Jam and Sparrow, he glanced around warily before making way. "How was it? Did the hunt succeed?" he asked in excitement and curiosity after closing the door. "Vice Admiral Ailment is a famous beauty. Back when I saw her, she was even more charming than I imagined. What a pity if she were to just die like that. She should be locked up forever without parole, Pewee." How can she be prettier than Captain? Those with looks like her are plenty in the Red Theater. Contradictory thoughts ran through Danitz's head. Klein clenched his fist and placed it to his mouth before coughing violently. After calming down, he answered coldly, almost. What a pity, Danitz sighed. But deep down he was thinking, this madman J.M. Sparrow is really strong. He infiltrated the Black Death to assassinate Vice Admiral Aylman, but was only just fell short of success. Even though he failed, he successfully returned almost without any injury. One had to know that the reason why every pirate admiral was famous throughout the 5 seas, being second only to the 4 kings, wasn't only because they themselves were strong, it was also because they represented a crew, a force to be reckoned with. They had many Beyonders under them. To be able to escape from the Black Death after a failed assassination had indicated that J.M. Sparrow was in no way weaker than any pirate admiral. Is creeping hunger really that powerful? No, even if I were in his shoes and had creeping hunger, I wouldn't be able to go that far. Danitz was increasingly convinced that his choice of not resisting during his first encounter with J.M. Sparrow was extremely wise. Klein coughed twice again and prepared to instruct Danitz to buy some medicine for him from the hospital. He then recalled that the cause of his illness was complicated. The medicine provided to him, without a doctor's careful examination, might not be effective. Even the many medicines that Emperor Roselle had previously invented were the same. If it wasn't because it's impossible to use the gray fog to establish a remote treating system, I really wish that I could consult Emlyn White to make me some medicine. Klein went to the washroom to wash up and change into his original clothes and burn the clothes he obtained from the fisherman. Upon seeing him come out, Danitz went over with a paper bag and said in a sycophantic manner, "This is the 700 pounds they gave." At this point, he and Klein heard someone knock on the door. It was Captain Elland. When the captain rushed into the room, he gave J.M. Sparrow a deep look and suppressed his voice. He planned on returning to Pritz Harbor, but I received a piece of intel. Something huge seemed to have happened at Banzi Harbor. The Church of Storms has finally taken action on Banzi Harbor. Klein clenched his fist and placed it to his mouth before coughing. He asked calmly without any qualms what happened. Ellen didn't notice any abnormal reaction from J.M. Sparrow. He retracted his gaze and surveyed the area. Don't know what exactly happened. I only know that it might have involved the upper echelons of the Church of Storm. And for a period of time before that, all routes that lead to Banzi Harbor were canceled. This might have been a so-called omen. Involved the upper echelons of the Church of Storm. No, it should be the most elite forces. I suspect that the pontiff of the Church of Storms, that grounded angel, had personally taken action. He might have even used a grade 0 sealed artifact. After all, he might be facing a king of angels, one that's even older than the 4th epoch, as well as his descendants. Klein nodded and calmly asked, "What's the outcome?" He wasn't the least bit surprised that the Church of Storms had only taken action on Banzi Harbor in the past few days. Even though the mandated punishers were known for being rash and irascible, there was still a protocol that needed to be followed for serious matters like this. For example, they needed to make a confirmation, evacuate a portion of innocent residents, or seal off the surrounding sea. All of this needed time. Ellen was unable to read J.M. Sparrow's true emotions as he sighed with a smile. There won't be a Banzi Harbor for a very long period of time. As expected of the Church of Storms, Klein secretly clicked his tongue, feeling even more curious about the detailed process. He wanted to know whether Red Angel Medici had appeared, and if he really was sleeping near Banzi Harbor. He wanted to know if he had been wiped out by the Church of Storms, and wished to know what happened to the natives in Banzi Harbor. He wanted to know what it meant for them to speak in such a staccato manner, and he wished to know what secrets were hidden in the Green Lemon restaurant and the telegraph office. Unfortunately, with Banzi Harbor's destruction, it was difficult for him to obtain any actual answer. Perhaps the internal record of the Church of Storms would mention them, but Klein had no way of getting them. With the hanged man's rank, there was no way he could gain access to such confidential information. I'll have to nurture Mr. Hanged Man into a high-sequence demigod before I can know the answers to my questions. Klein sighed silently and said without a change in expression, "That place is indeed very dangerous." Before he finished his sentence, his throat itched as he coughed violently. "You fell ill?" Ellen asked, puzzled. He originally imagined that J.M. Sparrow was like him, a Beyonder whose physique had been considerably enhanced. It was unlikely for Beyonders like them to fall ill before they grew weak from age. But from the looks of it, his previous guess might have been wrong. Klein answered tersely, without giving an explanation. A question of no value or meaning. It would be odd if he isn't ill after an intense battle with ailment maiden. Danitz grumbled in contempt from the side. Ellen chuckled and said, I can recommend you an apothecary that's better than a hospital or clinic. That's his Beyonder job. He has a tiny herb store in the alley, diagonally across Red Theater. He's known for selling male enhancements, but that's not what he's best at. Does every apothecary develop such medicine? That's right. It's absolutely one of the most profitable medicine-based businesses. It's only odd not to do it if they're capable of doing it. Klein nodded slightly in response. Why haven't I heard of him? Danitz asked, surprised. He only came to Bayham in the past few months. When was your last visit here in the City of Generosity? Elend asked with a chuckle. When I took your crappy boat, Danitz answered silently in his mind. He carefully recalled and discovered that in the past few months, apart from this period of time, he had passed by Bayham once during the early days of his vacation. At other times, he was drifting out at sea in search of treasure. Otherwise, he was at other places or harbors enjoying himself, so it was true that he wasn't aware of any minor changes in the City of Generosity. I've already spent quite a few days in Bayham. I've been to the Red Theater several times, but I've not heard anything about this apothecary. This can only serve to imply that his male enhancement medicines are limited in effect. Danitz bragged as he said stubbornly. Ellen smiled and didn't debate with the great pirate. Instead, he said to Jam and Sparrow, if it's only an ordinary ailment, the apothecary will only charge a slight premium. And for you, it doesn't matter if it's expensive. What's most important is to recover your health as quickly as possible. No adventurer wishes to stay in a sick state. This implies danger, and that you might become the target of someone else. It implies the increased risk of losing control. Indeed, maintaining a good state is a rather important matter for Beyonders. However, the price is still very important, all right. If that apothecary were to charge £1,000, then I might as well buy medicine from the hospital. Or I can describe the situation of my illness and get that vampire, Emlyn White, to make me some medicine. Although I already have £6,000 in savings and have several Beyonder characteristics, I still need to consider it. I still want to add a mystical item with lethal offensive power and seek out clues to the high-sequence potion formula, Klein mumbled inwardly. High-sequence potion formulas were impossible to put a price on in this mysterious world. Therefore, Klein only thought of buying the relevant clues. After Ellen left, Klein took the £700 and gave Danitz £200. Wearing his hat and holding his cane, he coughed and wiped his snot before stepping out the door in preparation to take a carriage to the vicinity of the Red Theater. Danitz was very curious about the apothecary's medicine. He pasted 2 mustaches on his face, wore a cap and followed. With Klein's guidance, he already knew that using a scarf to hide his face was an act that strongly attracted attention in Bayham. He took his advice to buy some fake mustaches. In the alley diagonally across the Red Theater, the moment Klein entered, he saw a man furtively come out of a nameless herb store. The moment the man saw someone, he hurriedly lowered his head and rushed off. Don't worry. We won't be guessing what medicine you're buying. Klein coughed twice again, increased his pace, and walked into the dark herb store. He scanned the area and was surprised because the boss was someone he knew. The boss was wearing a black robe that resembled a village witch doctor. He was in his 30s, with black hair and brown eyes. His face was round and his body chubby. He was none other than the chubby apothecary, who often liked to use sarcasm at the gathering held by old Mr. Eye of Wisdom in Backland. Klein had once recognized him at a circuit. He stopped showing up at old Mr. Eye of Wisdom's Beyonder gathering because he left Backland. Klein coughed and took 2 steps forward. Make some medicine for me. On the chubby apothecary's shoulder stood a round-eyed owl. The man and the bird looked up at the same time at Klein. After a brief examination, the chubby apothecary revealed a warm smile. Friend, it's cold outside. Don't do those deeds out in the open, although it's true that it can be rather exciting. What the hell? Klein was first stumped before he understood what he was getting at. When batting Tracy, I was influenced by her pleasure power. Blood flowed down to my nether regions, and my desires undulated. This resulted in my body emptying out, making it faster and easier for the ailment to strike me. When escaping, the ice-cold sea was fine since I had theurgical spells protecting me. But the wind on the way back was rather cold. It worsened my sickness. In conclusion, doesn't this look like getting sick as a result of having pleasure out in the open? As expected of an apothecary, he has sharp eyes. Klein maintained a composed expression and just looked at him without answering him. All he did was wait for him to concoct the medicine. Danitz turned his head to look out the herb store as he held back his laughter with great difficulty. What dog's tea apothecary is this? He can't even distinguish the ailments released by ailment maiden. He thought in glee. When the chubby apothecary didn't get a response, he dully opened some cabinets, took out some common or strange herbs and insect carapaces, stuffed them into a paper bag, and handed it over. Put it all in water and cook it for half an hour. Drink the liquid that's left over. For solely. It's a little expensive. Klein glanced at Danit. The latter immediately took out the money automatically. As the chubby apothecary collected the money, he bent his back and suppressed his voice to say with a chuckle, "I have medicine that can make you stand out in that area. The kind that has mummy powder added. Need it? I guarantee you that you'll be satisfied. Tino, you might be very strong, but men always seek to be stronger. Firstly, I need to have a girlfriend." Klein coldly shook his head and rejected the chubby apothecary's recommendation. The chubby apothecary straightened his back in disappointment. He turned his gaze and sized up the two before asking, "Are the both of you adventurers?" "Yes," Klein answered simply. The chubby apothecary rubbed his hands and said, "I have a request, but you'll only be paid after completing it." "How big is the reward?" Klein pinched his nose. £100. The chubby apothecary shouted as his heart pained for the money. "Help me find someone. His name is Roy King. He's my teacher. He got me to meet him here, but I haven't seen him after waiting for months. And I have no way of contacting him." "Is there a portrait cough? Or a photograph?" Klein inquired. The chubby apothecary took out a photograph from a secret pouch by his waist and handed it over. It was of a relatively young man. His hair was neatly combed back and he wore glasses. He appeared very gentlemanly. "Your teacher?" Klein asked. "I might believe it if you're the teacher." The chubby apothecary coughed dryly and said, "He's at least 60, but he looks young. A Beyonder power or a mystical item?" Klein nodded in thought and began asking about the specifics. After confirming that there weren't any items he could use to divine, he took the paper bag and left the store. After he disappeared from the alley, the owl standing on the chubby apothecary's shoulder suddenly said, "Darkwill, that guy might know you." "Goodbye what? He knows me." The chubby apothecary, Darkwill, was alarmed as he whispered back. The owl's round eyes looked ahead and said, "I noticed that he clearly paused for 2 seconds the moment he saw you when he came in. Perhaps he thinks someone like me doesn't match his image of an apothecary." The chubby apothecary retorted. The owl spread its wings and landed. "Suit yourself if you wish to think so. What books have you been reading recently?" The fat on the chubby apothecary's face trembled. The owl replied sternly and seriously, "My reading is based on your knowledge standards such as those involving Socrates. Unfortunately, the words you grasp and can teach me are limited. I have no choice but to read popular novels that have a lower requirement on one's vocabulary. Besides, they're all serialized on the newspaper." Darkwill chuckled. "T'll buy a recipe cookbook later. It's called Guide to East Balam Bird Culinary Method." Without waiting for the owl to answer, his expression sank and he muttered to himself, "He knows me. He looks like the standard Lonese man. More than half his blood is at least Lone. T used a fake name to stay in a few cities in Lone. It's not odd to be recognized by him. But I still need to be on guard. If I don't receive any news about old man before March, then I have to leave this place." Having said that, he turned his head to look at the owl who was perched on his shoulder. "At times you're still rather useful. No, your eyes and your body language tells me that your real thoughts are darn. I wanted to buy a pet that can help me beat monsters and gangsters. I sought out Beyonder ingredients of a potion recipe according to the standards of a dragon, but I ended up getting a silly bird who only knows how to read newspapers and play. Darn it, I want to stuff another potion down its throat." The owl repeated like a parrot by mimicking the chubby apothecary's tone. Darkwill's expression stiffened for a few seconds before he chuckled. "TT's good that you know this, silly bird. TF, I didn't have the powers of a beast tamer. You wouldn't have even managed a single potion." Inside the herb store, the man and bird fell into silence. After a while, the owl pretended as though nothing had happened as it asked, "Darkwill, is it really going to work? You've already entrusted this to dozens of adventurers. Team not good at finding people, so I can only entrust it to someone else. Besides, they have to find and confirm old man's location before I make a payment. I don't even need to spend a single penny." The chubby apothecary tusked as he said before he sighed. "Old man always calls himself a lucky person and a winner of fate. He should be fine. Will the medicine brewed from this really be effective?" While returning to the Wind of Azure in via carriage, Danitz looked at the paper bag beside Klein. The things inside were black herbs, strangely shaped insect carapaces, and weirdly colored flowers. It didn't seem like anything reliable. Klein nodded. "Yes. You haven't drunk it," Danitz subconsciously retorted. "I trust him. Although his mouth stinks and is rather vile, he has a rather kind heart besides. Captain Ellen believes that his medicine is sufficiently effective." As Jam and Sparrow, Klein didn't respond to Danitz's doubts. He directly picked up the paper bag and threw it over. Without needing any spoken words, Danitz knew what he meant. He was in charge of brewing the medicine. Furthermore, he was accustomed to doing similar matters recently, so he didn't have any urges to resist. After returning to the Wind of Azure Inn, Klein got a chair to sit in while he watched Danitz light up the fireplace and prop up a pot. He then added water and the herbs into it. Leaning back, Klein felt his head feel groggy. He was very exhausted and felt like he could fall asleep at any moment. In order to wait for the medicine to finish brewing and for him to quickly resolve his illness, he forced himself to consider various problems to combat the fatigue. On careful consideration, during the battle with Vice Admiral Aylment, if I hadn't succeeded in sneaking in an attack on her and suppressing her from the very beginning, preventing her from getting into her rhythm until she eventually found a chance to force open a gap between us by turning invisible, then I might have not been her match. The two powers of invisibility and ailments are really like a bug in a game. Matched with an assassin's lethal strike and the interference of pleasure, it really makes one unable to find and hit her or escape. One can only watch their body gradually weaken and become inflicted with all sorts of ailments. One can even get mesmerized and give up resisting. On the one hand, it's because every sequence 5 is very powerful, as expected of the sequence just before a demigod. On the other hand, it's because creeping hunger's various powers aren't a good match. It cannot be considered to be multifaceted without any weaknesses. Yes, the powers of a sequence 5 Nimblewright master of the seer pathway is highly effective against invisibility. I can try to help the chubby apothecary find his teacher in the meantime, but without any information, with just a picture, I can only try my luck. I'll have to see when I can directly find a clue. After all, I'm not a god, and I can't find people remotely. Wait, in a certain way, I am a god. I can get God believers to help find it. As long as that old gentleman named Roy King once visited Bayam, he would have definitely encountered others and be seen by them. Most native residents secretly believe in God. This is what it means by a sea of people. Also, before Captain Ellen leaves Bayam, I should get him to introduce me to a point of contact for the military. In the future, I can get him to reimburse me for any intel. I can also check if there were any travelers named Roy King who registered on any liners in recent months. There's another method. I've placed the radio transceiver above the gray fog for some time. I should be able to contact the magic mirror arrows if I take it down. I was originally planning on asking for Helen's location, but I no longer need to find the red-haired lady anymore. I can switch to Roy King. For a matter which many adventurers have no clue on how to begin, I have 3 solutions. Midst his thoughts, Klein finally held on until the medicine was successfully brewed. Looking at the bottle of blackish-green liquid that Danitz brought over, he hesitated for 2 seconds before extending his hand to receive it and placed it to his mouth. Gulp! Klein immediately felt his throat burn as his face flushed red. This made him recall his attempt at eating crazy spicy food in his previous life. Suddenly, his entire person awakened as his stuffy nose quickly cleared. Gulp! Gulp! He barely finished drinking it and felt as though he had nearly recovered from his sickness. By nighttime, he had fully recovered. He no longer showed any doubt towards an apothecary's ability. No wonder the potion's name is Apothecary. Klein wore his hat and left the inn with Danitz. Under the cloak of night, they left Bayam and came to a secret harbor hidden on the other end of the jungle. Tonight, the Golden Dream was providing aid to the resistance. After some coordination and hassle, Danitz used the soulful ritual to contact Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina. After some time, the ship, that was often scrubbed clean and had a strange main cannon, docked by the private harbor. Its gigantic sails drew 5 types of gold coin. They were the gold pound of Lone, the gold horn of Fasak, the Viral gold of Intis, the gold Rissat of Fainapotter, and the Sassan gold of Lenberg. This was the flag of the Golden Dream. It was also the symbol of this pirate crew. It's still not professional enough. If it were me, I would add Porter gold from Masson, Zitoti from Seger, motif gold coins from Balam Empire, etc. Klein stood by the side with his hands in his pocket as he watched Edwina Edwards appear at the bow. At that moment she was wearing a hunter's hat, a rider's shirt, and a black coat. She matched the image of a female pirate admiral in the minds of the resistant. She often dresses like she's a private tutor. Klein mumbled and took a few steps back, allowing Danitz to run around and busy himself. This pirate worth 5,500 pounds did the liaison, sending a batch of food and fabric to Khaled, and the resistance before the transaction came to a close. Danitz secretly inhaled and came to Klein's side and forced a smile. There's nothing else, right? T can now return to the Golden Dream, right? Also, how do you plan on settling the hiring fee? That's only an excuse your captain and I use. In a particular sense, this batch of food and fabric is my payment, Klein nodded. Your captain has already paid. You can return. For real? Danitz found it unbelievable. Although Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina wasn't far behind him, he was still afraid that Jam and Sparrow would suddenly have a crazy fit. Klein didn't reply and turned around, walking straight towards the path that led out of the private harbor. Danitz exhaled silently and held back his excited feelings before briskly running back to the Golden Dream. Only when the Golden Dream steered far away into the night, with the private harbor that belonged to the resistance slowly shrinking in size, did he really believe that he was back on the Golden Dream. At that instant, he felt that he had experienced just too many things over the past half a month or so. It was an unprecedented level of exhilaration, as though it was an interesting dream. At this moment, a sailor came close and asked out of curiosity, "Boss, was Steele Mavetti really killed by you?" Danitz immediately laughed out loud and secretly stole a glance at Captain Edwina before saying to his subordinate, "I contributed greatly to this deed. Let's talk over drinks." Above the dark sea, the Golden Dream drifted off into the distance. After returning to the Wind of Azure Inn, Klein was just about to sleep when he saw the surrounding colors turn abnormally bright. The white bedsheets turned whiter, and the brown floorboards turned more brownish-yellow. The dark red curtains appeared like fresh blood. In the scene with all sorts of colors stacked upon each other, Isaac Eggers suddenly walked out from a rippling aqueous void. He was dressed in his usual shirt, bow tie, tailcoat, and a top hat. His skin was bronze in color, and he had soft facial features. How enviable! I also wish to have such powers of traveling through the spirit world. Klein silently sighed as he smiled in greeting while maintaining his appearance. Good evening, Mr. Isaac. Isaac took off his top hat and looked at the rather unfamiliar face. Without finding it strange, he chuckled. Apologies. I came in a hurry. I should have knocked on the door. What's the exact situation with those death chronicles? Klein invited him to have a seat. He then described in detail things he couldn't explain in the letter. Towards the end, he mentioned in passing about the matter regarding Banzi Harbor, saying how it involved King of Angels Medici and his descendants. Isaac leaned back into the chair and said with a frown, "There's such a name in my memory. He should have the 2 titles of Red Angel and War Angel. However, he had perished long ago." Perished long ago? Klein asked in surprise. Isaac nodded and thought over it. Remember that he was killed by Blood Emperor Alistair Tudor. Killed by Blood Emperor Alistair Tudor. Klein's pupils shrank as he recalled the evil spirit that loitered in the underground ruins beneath Backland. It had claimed to be an innocent killed by the Blood Emperor. Could it be that that evil spirit is Red Angel Medici, the King of Angels who once served that creator and was one of the founders of Rose Redemption? Klein instantly generated such a thought, and began utilizing backward inference to seek out any traces or clues. The former holder of the Red Priest card was attracted to the underground palace because of a certain level of attraction, and had died beside the Tudor descendants. The evil spirit I saw in my dream could easily kill a powerful dragon back when it was alive. It knows the potion formula of the mutant pathway sequence 4 and even more. It's very aware of matters regarding Rose's redemption. The Orthodox churches that have existed ever since the Cataclysm don't know that the former Binzi, and that the present Banzi has a descendant of the Medici family residing there, but the evil spirit was able to provide the corresponding information. There's a very high chance of deriving this from the death of Red Angel Medici, and this king of angels was actually killed by Blood Emperor Alistair Tudor. Does this mean that the latter had already exceeded Sequence 1, and had reached the rank of true God as a Sequence O, and could no longer be witnessed directly? That evil spirit said so itself that in the late stages of the Fourth Epoch, Solomon Empire's Dark Emperor, Tudor Empire's Blood Emperor, and Trunsost Empire's Night Emperor were fighting for the position of Sequence O until Alistair Tudor went crazy. Does this mean that from that point onwards, Blood Emperor was a half-crazy true god? Right, Mr. Azek mentioned in the letter that he lost his senses from merely being glanced at by Blood Emperor Alistair Tudor. Back then, he was at least a Sequence 4 demigod. Have such might, it can only be explained that Blood Emperor was at the true god level. Mr. Azek also described the revival of the true Dark Emperor in his letter. He described him as sitting on a gigantic throne as he overlooked the land. For the Dark Emperor to revive and return, there is a high chance that he was a true god at the Sequence O rank. If that were the case, the War of the Four Emperors was of a higher order than I previously imagined. It's no longer a battle of 3 Sequence 1s fighting for the position of Sequence 0. Klein connected all the dots from the past, gaining a brand new understanding of Fourth Epoch history. But as a result, many questions arose. If that ancient evil spirit really is King of Angels Medici, then the underground palace might very well belong to Blood Emperor Alistair Tudor. Then why would there be 2 thrones of equal standing? Why would there be 6 humanoid statues of the true god? Why would the half-crazy Blood Emperor kill Red Angel Medici? After he became Sequence 0, which spot did he occupy? Firstly, Dark Emperor can be eliminated. It can't be Red Priest, right? Red Angel Medici was killed for its Beyonder characteristic. But Red Priest and Dark Emperor do not seem like neighboring pathways that allow exchanging. I can basically confirm that the former is paired with the Demoness pathway. Yes, Captain mentioned before that consuming the potions of other pathways might not mean death, but there's a high probability of going mad and obtaining warped but terrifying powers. This matches Blood Emperor's half-crazy trait. In his final step, as there was no hope for Dark Emperor and any neighboring pathways, he took the craziest choice and switched to another pathway that's completely unrelated, becoming half-crazy as the price. But the same problem arises. Advancing to Red Priest requires King of Angels Medici to be killed, but before advancing, Alistair Tudor wouldn't have been able to complete it by himself. Unless he had more Sequence 1s helping him or other Sequence 0 true gods. Upon realizing this, the statues in the underground palace suddenly flashed past Klein's mind. The Evernight Goddess statue who used the moon as a pillow, the Earth Mother statue that hugged a baby in her bosom, the Lord of Storms statue that had lightning flashing behind him, the handsome Eternal Blazing Sun statue, the tall and royal God of Combat statue, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom statue who wore a hood all cast ice cold gazes at him from the darkness. At that instant, Klein couldn't help but tremble. However, he remembered that the 6 gods supported the Trunsost Empire, not the Tudor Empire. The history of the Fourth Epoch becomes more harrowing and confusing the more you delve into it. Klein sighed secretly. What are you thinking about? Azek Eggers noticed his pause. Klein said in passing, I was only thinking that since Red Angel Medici had long perished at the hands of Alistair Tudor, then who is the god of weather who has a following in Banzi Harbor during the recent century? And what's the reason for their odd behavior? With this in mind, Klein came to pause. This was because the matter regarding Banzi Harbor was unlike what he imagined. He originally believed that Red Angel Medici was asleep there, but to his surprise, he had long perished. In that case, the secrets underlying the Green Lemon restaurant and the telegraph office became even more indecipherable. He had no way of deducing anything without any further information. The more he thought about it, the more horrified he became. Could that evil spirit have expected such an outcome when he indicated Binzi Town? That might have been a required step for him to escape the seal. Should I tell this matter to Mr. Azek and gain his opinion? Yes, I'll let Miss Magician, who's in Backland, to monitor the area and see if there's any abnormality. If there's none, it can wait till I return to Backland and contact Miss Sharon. After seeking her opinion, I can inform Mr. Azek. After all, it's a ruin we explored together. I have to respect her opinion. If there are any abnormalities, then the matter can only be expedited due to the seriousness of the issue. Klein quickly made a decision. When Azek heard his question, he laughed. Don't think about such matters. They've definitely been buried by the Church of Storm. Forcibly seek out, the reasons will only bring about extreme danger. Even at the level of an angel, there's still a chance of perishing. In the mysterious world, curiosity is often the leading cause of death. Klein recalled the matters he had experienced and heard of in the past. He switched to saying, Mr. Azek, I already have a messenger that I can call my own. Much faster than I imagined, Azek said with a smile. Klein simply explained how he changed the incantation and how he completed the summoning and ended up encountering an oddity in the spirit world. When summoning spirit world creatures, there's indeed a chance of such things happening when it's not done by someone of the corresponding job. It requires repeated trial and error before obtaining the desired result. But repeated attempts make it easy to encounter danger. Even if you add descriptions like friendly, it isn't absolutely safe. The spirit world creature which is summoned might not have any malicious intent towards you and wouldn't wish to harm you, but it doesn't mean that its very existence won't hurt you. Perhaps just the aura it has can reduce you to a pile of blood. After Azek heard about the creature whose speed surpassed imagination, the being who was easily neglected, and the creature with extremely high survivability, he laughed and warned him. After that he asked, how did you succeed in the end? Klein said in embarrassment, I changed the final sentence to, a unique being that is willing to be my messenger. Azek was taken aback for a second as he curiously looked at Klein. This description is too generic. Typically, it wouldn't succeed. Perhaps I was rather lucky. Klein cautiously described his messenger's appearance and even hid the matter of her request for a gold coin. Azek thought over it carefully and said, I do not have an impression of this spirit world creature, but since you've already signed a contract and have had it witnessed by the underworld, she likely wouldn't cause you any harm. However, before you fully understand her, try not to get her to do anything apart from sending letters. All right. Klein originally wanted to say that he had nothing he needed her for other than sending letters when he recalled his battle with Mr. A. The room fell into a brief moment of silence before Klein pulled the conversation back on track. Mr. Azek, when can we head for the Black Death? The longer the delay, the higher the chances of whatever he left on the Black Death to be cleaned up during the daily cleaning jobs. Now, Azek stood up and put on his hat. Klein was dressed properly, and just as he was trying to find an excuse to head to the washroom to divine if there would be any danger taking action tonight, Azek grabbed his shoulder and pulled him into the spirit world. Amidst the stacked colors and nearly formless figures, he heard Mr. Azek say, let's begin. That direct. Don't you need to confirm things? Perhaps a big shot has his own way of determining the level of danger. Klein silently mumbled and held up his cane and began divining the location of the items he left behind. The cane flew automatically as it tumbled ahead. Azek followed closely behind with Klein in tow as they smoothly passed through the spirit world. Before long, the black hardwood cane paused with thick black and stacked shadows ahead of it. Through this abstract scene, Klein could vaguely identify it as something resembling the Black Death. At this moment, Azek's body came to a pause as he solemnly said, the spirits here tell me that there is danger. There is danger. Something that can make even Mr. Azek find it dangerous. Vice Admiral Ailment got help. A high-ranking member of the Demoness sect. Klein frowned suddenly. He fully believed the judgment of the big shot, since Sequence 7 of the Death Pathway was spirit medium. After advancing to the realm of demigod, being able to notice this was considered very normal. Azek half closed his eyes for 2 seconds before opening them. But the problem isn't serious. Let's enter. Problem isn't serious. That's probably the case when it's directed at you. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he decided to change his looks. This way, even if he was no match and had to flee pathetically, he didn't have to be afraid of someone coming to knock on his door. In an instant, Klein possessed a distinctive broad chin and cold blackish-green eye. His hair turned brown, and was tied into a bun at the back of his head like an ancient warrior. He had disguised himself as the former owner of Creeping Hunger, Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalango. Isaac gave him a glance, as the surroundings suddenly seemed to plummet, as all sorts of bright colors flew by. In a blink of an eye, Klein found himself in Ailment Maiden Tracy's captain's cabin again. This gallant and brilliant female pirate was wearing a different white shirt. On her left shoulder was a clear bandage, while her black hair was coiled up instead of cascading down amorously. Faced with this sudden visitor, she didn't show any panic but smile. At this moment, a gentle female's voice from a difficult-to-identify location sounded. "It's you.